The area in southern Ukraine known as Crimea now belongs to Russian President Vladimir Putin.
What has already happened is a brazen act of aggression.
Within hours of the orders, Putin's forces invaded and took complete control of the Crimean airspace, airports, highways, ports, and regional government, without a single shot fired yet.
We are on the brink of the disaster.
Crimea is of huge significance to Russia. The Russian Black Sea Naval Fleet is located here. But Putin's ambitions go beyond the Crimean Peninsula. His next target could be eastern Ukraine. Over the weekend, pro-Russian demonstrators took control of key government buildings in several regions, replacing European Union flags with Russian ones, and called for union with Moscow.
We want Russia to hand out Russian passports to citizens who want them.
Ukraine accuses Moscow of orchestrating the takeover to justify an even wider invasion. 45 million people live in Ukraine. Nearly 8 million of them are ethnic Russians. Putin claims the new Ukrainian government installed after the ouster of Viktor Yanukovych is fascist and will persecute ethnic Russians. Putin says it's his job to protect them.
We want to live in peace, but we need security from Russia.
The crisis is even dividing some families.
Putin is not going to leave us alone. My sisters in Russia are offended at me and are yelling at me not to speak ill of their president. But I say to them, then your president shouldn't touch us.
For many Russians, Ukraine is viewed as part of the motherland. So when thousands of Ukrainians took to the streets 103 days ago demanding closer ties to Europe and the West, Putin wasn't too happy about it. Russia hasn't recognized the new pro-Western government in Kiev, and most experts believe Moscow will try anything to make sure it fails. This weekend, Ukraine's new but unstable government put the country on a war footing, ordering up all military reservists to active duty. This as Russian troops urge Ukrainian soldiers to lay down their weapons and pledge allegiance to Russia.
You know, this takes you back in history to the beginning of World War II, when there was an area called Sudetenland, and Adolf Hitler said, well, they're ethnic Germans. They're part of Czechoslovakia, but the Sudetendeutsch are ours, and we demand that the oppression of our people be eliminated. And of course, that's when Neville Chamberlain permitted the dismemberment of Czechoslovakia, had one of the most powerful armies in Europe, and that was disbanded. And of course, Hitler then not only rolled over Czechoslovakia, then turned and rolled over Poland. Where does Putin end? Where does his ambition end? He wants to return the glory of greater Russia. And it is obvious in the Crimea, that's a huge naval base and it's strategically important to the Russians. But nevertheless, what provocation can it be? The Ukrainians have said we want a different president. The president we had is a crook. He's been stealing money. He's been looting the Treasury. The Treasury's bankrupt, and we want to change. Well, every nation has a privilege of selecting its own leaders. That's not a reason for war. Well, George Thomas has just returned from the Crimea. George, were you afraid that maybe you might be subject to some military action, or did you get out just in time?
Pat, thank you for having me on the show. Yes, we got out just in the nick of time, and I'm actually heading tomorrow morning to Kharkov, which is about 5 hours east of Kiev. It's in the eastern province, one of the key regions in the east. I decided not to go back to Crimea because I'm getting reports from my sources on the ground that the Russian troops are in addition to trying to keep everybody else from getting into the Crimean Peninsula, they are specifically targeting journalists, in some cases confiscating their gear, their helmets, their bulletproof vests. Clearly don't want to let the world know what is going on inside. But look, Russia is in complete control of the Crimean Peninsula. The 6,000 troops, in essence, waltzed right across the border and took over within about 48 hours without one shot fired. It was so easy and lightning in.
George, it looks like the Ukrainians in an eastern part of the country really want alliance with Russia. How will the Ukrainians ever get those troops out of the Crimea?
Yeah, it's going to be very, very difficult, Pat. I mean, here's the ground reality. Russia has 850,000 troops on its side of the border. Ukraine has about 130,000. Half of them are conscripts. In the Crimean Peninsula for the last 10, 15 years, there have been stationed between 15 to 20,000 Russian naval forces. They are there. There are several warships that are surrounding the Crimean Peninsula. There's absolutely no way that the Ukraine soldiers can go. And there are several military bases, incidentally, Pat, in the Crimean Peninsula that are surrounded at this very moment by Russian troops. As I mentioned in my piece, they're trying to encourage the Ukrainians to lay down their arms. And in some cases, at some military bases, they say, in exchange for laying down your arms, we will give you a beautiful minted Russian passport.
What can the U.S. do? Have you talked to anybody over there that has any solutions?
Look, John Kerry, U.S. Secretary John Kerry is flying in tomorrow on a surprise visit. Clearly, this is a playbook that Vladimir Putin has had organized for quite some time, way before the Sochi Olympic Games, and I mean, this is something that he was planning well ahead of time. NATO, EU, the United States cannot do anything at the moment. I mean, the least they can do is try to shore up the economic foundation of this country. Remember, Pat, this is an interim government just elected last week, very, very unstable, very weak, and doesn't have the support in the eastern part of the country. You know, you saw those demonstrations, and that's why I'm heading there tomorrow. Thousands of pro-Russian demonstrators. They've gone into key government buildings and they've replaced the flags of the European Union with the Russian flag. I mean, there is the anger toward this interim government is very, very real. And while I was in Sevastopol late last week, the anti-American sentiment, as you can imagine, because this is a predominantly pro-Russian city, the anti-American sentiment is extremely high. They blame Russia for orchestrating the revolution in Kiev, and they say, listen, we don't trust this interim government. We feel like we're going to persecute ethnic Russians, and we welcome Russia to come and help us.
George, stay safe. Let us hear from you. We appreciate so much you being there on the ground. It's very important.